So right here we're seeing the magnificent Statue of Liberty. Look at that. Wow. Hello everyone, I'm Ariel, and right now we are on Classic Harbor Line taking a tour through the New York Harbor, and then we're gonna go and venture into an area that most tours don't go to, which is Staten Island, specifically to Freshkills, which we're gonna learn about the massive park. I'm so excited.
We're coming into an area called Greenville, a portion of Jersey City. We're approaching the border between Jersey City and Bayonne. I also want to point out a little piece of infrastructure, but very important. It's a little bit hard to see, but if we look to the north, so to the right of that forest of cranes right there off at about 2 o'clock, you can see a little gray house on stilts. This is one of the last working transfer bridges, is what they're called, in New York Harbor. So I mentioned before that we have ways to cross the Hudson River for cars and for trucks and for passenger trains, but not for freight trains. So if you want to get a freight train from New Jersey into New York City, except for Staten Island, if you want to get it to any of the other 4 boroughs, what you do is you pull in right there where that little gray house is, and you drive the train onto a specially designed barge with railroad tracks on it. It's called a car float. And then they float those barges across the harbor, and they go over actually to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, the 65th Street rail yard. So this is still operated by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. It's still used pretty much every day. We probably won't see them on a Sunday, but weekdays you see them going back and forth a few times a day. And so this will then link up to the Long Island Railroad and all up into New England, and any railroad that is essentially east of the Hudson River. So a key little piece of infrastructure right there. One of the things that really made New York such an important and busy harbor, not just we have this huge, wonderfully protected waterfront, but also we had a huge population, because moving freight was incredibly labor intensive. Things were really moved in pieces that were big enough for 1 or 2 people to carry. Think about commodities like coffee, sugar, tea. They're moved in bags and barrels that are moved by hand by longshoremen. In the 1950s, really at the peak of the port's activity back then, we had about 60,000 longshoremen, again, moving everything by hand. That all changed. April 26, 1956, the first commercially successful container shipment is made. A guy named Malcolm McLean modified a ship, named it the Ideal X, and moved about 50 containers from Newark, New Jersey to Houston, Texas. And that was the beginning of the containerization revolution. I would argue the most important invention of the 20th century. So this is one of the most important shipyards in New York Harbor. You can see today it's called the Bayonne Dry Dock and Repair Corporation. Originally this was known as the Brooklyn Navy Yard Annex. This was built during World War II as dry dock number 7 of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Why did they build this? Well, as ships were getting bigger and bigger in World War II, some of them wouldn't fit underneath the Brooklyn Bridge anymore. So they wanted a dry dock south of all the obstructions of the bridge. So directly to our right, you can see that black structure there. It says Bayonne Dry Dock and Repair Corporation. Behind that is a 1,092-foot long ditch. And that's the dry dock. So they'll fill that with water, open the door, drive the ship in, close the door, and pump the water out, and then they can work on that ship. So just to orient you, to the left we have Staten Island, to the right this is Bayonne. And the very southern tip of Bayonne for a long time has really been dominated by the petrochemical industry. So you can see these big tank farms out here. And this area of New Jersey is significant for the petrochemical industry because this western edge of the harbor also is the terminus for many major pipelines for oil and natural gas and other petroleum products. So they're processed over here. As a result of that, this has been a very roughly treated waterway. We've had a number of spills, even in recent years. There was a major spill in 1990 New York Harbor is naturally not that deep. We have this major belt of silt called the Hudson River that flows into the harbor. And so some of our waterways are not naturally that deep, so they need to be dredged. And so you think, what depth they need to be dredged to? Well, there are different standards for it. And for about 100 years, the main standard that we were maintaining the harbor to was what's called Panamax. Panamax means this is the maximum size of a ship that can fit through the Panama Canal, right? Then that's what you would build ships to. They were built to this Panamax standard because you wanted to be able to fit through the locks of the Panama Canal. And so typically that meant a depth of about 39.5 feet for waterways. But then they expanded the Panama Canal. And so there's a new Panamax standard, deeper waterways. It might mean ships are longer, so you need to have bigger corners for them to get around. And it also means you need larger containers over the top of those ships that are getting bigger and taller and wider. So there were major projects done, which probably most New Yorkers weren't even aware of, to expand this harbor in order to accommodate the new Panamax standard, which is about 50 feet. Now, in much of the harbor, we can just dredge it, right? It's mostly a soft bottom. This is a rocky bottom right here in the Kilvan Cult. So this actually all had to be blasted in order to deepen this area. So that was one obstacle, what's underneath the water. But we had another major obstacle, what is above the water, and under it right now, and that is the Bayonne Bridge. So this is a steel arch span bridge, and historically, it was 151 feet above the water. That is too low for modern container ships. And even the old Panamax standard ships would hit this bridge all the time. Normally not anything serious, might be a radio antenna or something would hit it. But whenever that happens, you got to shut down the bridge, you got to inspect it, make sure everything's okay. It was a big hassle. And so what the Port Authority decided to do was raise the level of this bridge 65 feet. But what they did was they kept this steel span in place. The steel span didn't move because that's what holds up the bridge. Instead, they built a new roadway. So all those concrete abutments you see and that concrete roadway, that's all new. And the bridge looks different. It looks like much skinnier than it used to because the roadway is much closer to the top of the span and driving over it is much steeper now. This is also one of the few major highway bridges you can bicycle over, so it's much harder to get your bike over it now with this new span. But this project to raise this bridge 65 feet to accommodate new Panamax cost $1.3 billion. So a total of about $3 billion, it's probably more than that now, is spent on the expansion for the new Panamax standard here in New York Harbor. Again, huge economic engine for our city and for our region, but again, major infrastructure project that most people probably aren't even aware of. So back there is Mayship, which is really the only, it's been a few years I think since they've done a new build construction, but they do have the capacity to do new build. So they actually build barges, but primarily they work on barges, and so they have some floating dry docks, they have some travel lifts, and also some slipways so they can basically drag ships up out of the water there to work on them. This is the neighborhood of Mariners Harbor, and Mayship occupies a small portion of what used to be a huge complex all along this waterfront right here. That was the Bethlehem Steel Shipyard. So Bethlehem Steel got into the shipbuilding business, and during World War II, they actually operated 3 shipyards here in New York Harbor. One in New Jersey, one over in Brooklyn, and this one right here that primarily built destroyers during World War II. So this was a major shipyard and a major employer during the Second World War.
All right, thanks again, everyone. Again, my name is Andy. I work as the officer for Freshkills Park Alliance. I am born and raised on Staten Island. I love Staten Island, and I hope to convey that love to you folks today. As we're coming up to Freshkills and just following up on Andrew's last comments about the establishment of Freshkills, I want to give you the context of sort of when and how Freshkills was established as the major landfill for New York City. So much of what we're going to talk about today is going to focus on Robert Moses. I am going to try and remain as objective as possible. This is a person who had pretty much full power, full sway, or full control of the power that he wielded over New York City during the time that Freshkills was established. Freshkills at that time was largely a tidal marsh, and the vision that Robert Moses had for the island, for Staten Island, was to fill in this land, to make it useful, to make it productive, to divide the island with a highway. This may rhyme with history elsewhere in New York City and throughout cities throughout the U.S. And on one side, basically to concentrate the industrial uses and to separate those industrial uses from the residential or pleasurable recreational uses. So this wasteland, which is how he viewed wetlands, was to be filled in with trash for a short amount of time. This is going back to, by the way, 1948 was the establishment of Freshkills as a landfill. And then once it was filled in, then it was to be built upon to make useful as industry. That is not what happened. Well beyond those 3 years, it continued for another 50 years beyond that. So the landfill was not closed ultimately until 2001. We did accept the last barges came in were the debris from Terrorist attack of September 11, 2001. That debris is concentrated on the west mound of Freshkills. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I should just describe the place. We are right now sort of on the middle west shore of Staten Island. So if you're looking at a satellite view of Staten Island, it is more or less shaped like a kite. And this is about halfway down on the west side of the island is Freshkills. It looks to be like a fork that comes in, a inlet of water that is called Freshkills. I think we just covered that Kills is sort of a moving waterway in Dutch, Kill being a river, a creek, a riverbed, and fresh for English and water. New York City was, and hopefully ever will be, like a place for immigrants, and it was completely common, understandable to intermix English and Dutch words. Throughout New York City, this is very common. In Staten Island, this is very common. We have New Dorp, New Town. We had Old Dorp, Old Town, Freshkills, the Great Kills, the Kill Van Kull, the Arthur Kill. Very, very understandable. So the Freshkills is the name of the waterway, that initial trunk that branches on the north to the I think it's Freshkills, and the Main Creek, and the lower branch becomes Richmond Creek. One thing that is worth pointing out is the difference sort of left and right. Left, as we're looking out onto the green of Staten Island and Freshkills, and the right as we're looking out on industrial New Jersey. The thing that stands out to me most, especially when you're standing out on the mounds of Freshkills, are the liquid natural gas tanks. So this is a major reason why the right side of us, the New Jersey side, is so heavily industrialized. The energy sector that's located here, and why so many pipelines end here. One of the largest industrial accidents in the history of the United States happened on Staten Island. We had a liquid natural gas tank explode in the early 1970s. And because of that explosion, New York City, New York State sort of just said no to natural gas, liquid natural gas in urban centers. But New Jersey responded to that by saying, like, we'll take that business. We don't. Yeah. We're actually just coming around where you can see the mounds from here. I keep describing the mounds, so let me back up and say everything that is ground level is sort of at the historic level. It's the old marshland level. Everything was sea level here, or below, is the way that we describe it. And everything that's above is the result of the waste that was brought here from 1948 until 2001. The park is 2,200 acres in total. That's more than 3 times the size of Central Park. It is more or less divided into 4 parts called North Mound, South Mound, West Mound, East Mound, based off of the way that the Department of Sanitation deposited and landfilled the site. It is still owned and operated by the Department of Sanitation. There is a process by which that will get handed over to the Parks Department moving forward, but as of right now, it's all part of the Department of Sanitation. If you look to your left, you can just see a blue building. That is the waste transfer station, and that's a major improvement for the Life Islanders because previous to that enclosed building, this was an open landfill, and even after they had closed the open landfill, there was still an open transfer station. By that I mean they just dumped the trucks that drove through the neighborhoods and collected the refuse from the curbside. They just dumped that out in the open where birds, rats, vermin of all kinds would congregate. I think the point that illustrates this the most is on the Christmas Day bird count, if any of you are birders. I believe the largest count of gulls was found here on Staten Island. So the construction of that waste transfer facility dramatically improved the environmental impacts of the collection and processing of vaults here on Staten Island. Looking to our right, you can see the size of some of these barges that were coming in. At its peak of operation, which when I say peak of operation, the daily tonnage coming in was something like 30,000 tons a day. 1948, 1950, 1960 or so, we were hitting those numbers, about 30,000 tons a day. And the reason why this amount of trash was coming in, and it was all just residential trash just from New York City, by the way. There's a big misconception that that there were these dangerous materials, radioactive or chemical or what have you, unless people were throwing away uranium or chemical at their curbside in Brooklyn and Queens. That's not what was coming in here. This is just everybody's day-to-day during a time when planned obsolescence in terms of product design was hitting its peak. American consumerism was absolutely flying after World War II. And the move to the suburbs, which at that time was Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx, moving out of sort of apartment-style living in the city. And these larger households, this larger square footages, consume more waste, produce more waste, rather. So that Staten Island and Freshkills was the beneficiary of that largesse. We achieved like I was saying, those numbers of like 30,000 tons a day relatively early. This is West Mound. This is a memorial. It will be a memorial soon for the victims of the September 11th tragedy. And that's why the flag is there. This will be the last part of the park to open because of the logistical, emotional difficulties of doing exactly that. I grew up calling this the dump, and I would say that I was told when I first started working with waste management that there are such things as dumps, which is like when stuff is truly just carelessly dumped into a place. But there's also something known as a landfill, which is when it's carefully engineered. And even before this was envisioned as a park, it was carefully engineered so that water wouldn't, so basically that it could continue on as a landfill so that water wasn't eroding anything or collecting anywhere, making it hard for these giant machines. I mean, we haven't driven by any of the trucks or anything, but I could stand and not touch the axle of some of the trucks that were moving, just gigantic. So it always was a landfill and not a dump, even though that is colloquial. But transfer station is where material is moved from one mode to another mode. So from trucks here to now trains. But there is a transfer facility in Manhattan that goes from trucks to boats.
Captain Water was nice enough to take us a little bit south to show us the famous ship graveyard of Staten Island. So we're in the neighborhood of Rossville now, and this is known as the boat graveyard. Now it's technically the Don John Marine Metals Recycling Facility, but this is where we were talking before about John A. Noble and how the edge of Staten Island was filled with all these wrecks. You can still find wrecks other places on Staten Island, but this is one of the areas where they're very concentrated on the site. So there are a number of tugboats that are abandoned out here. Now, I don't visible from where we are anymore, but perhaps the most notable ship that's here in the ship graveyard, it's called PC-1264. It was a World War II submarine chaser. That was one of only 2 ships in World War II that had all African-American crews. The other one was the USS Mason, a destroyer Escort. So that ship, despite its historic nature, was unceremoniously dumped out here, but you can get a view of some of the other ships out here as we go past. So, this is a favorite spot for people to come explore. I have been out here myself. I will say that it is extremely dangerous, and because of that, the people whose property abuts it and has sort of access to it aren't so happy about people coming out here. So if you want to come check it out, maybe find yourself a kayak and paddle out here. Much, much safer and easier to get to. Also, as it's deteriorated more and more over the years, there's fewer and fewer access points from land out to the wrecks. But really interesting little piece of history out here. And eventually this will all be gone because these wrecks are deteriorating more and more over time. But yeah, so we have a little dump. This is a dump. This is the final. This is not a transfer station. This is a dump. Dump for a ship. So we got a little view of it.
The way that I most often interact with marine life, and I'm sure that it is there and doing pretty well, is on our kayaking tours. You can see all sorts of life happening. So there are the cormorants, which are birds that are happily feeding. Actually, most of the experience I've got with the marine life is through birds. You can see a lot of fish in the air when the osprey are holding them. They orient the fish in a particular way, which is something I find funny and charming about them. Yeah, they don't just grab and then however they get it, they have it. They aerodynamically arrange the fish so that the fish, I guess, as a final gift, get to fly, get to soar along, head first along with the osprey. And I was just describing the osprey before as this ultimate species at the top of a trophic level. And we know, one of the reasons we know how clean the waters are is that there are all these levels of life that feed up to these predators, this ultimate predator class of the osprey, who are able to not just live but thrive at Freshkills. We've got.
So they're the apex.
They're the apex. That's the word. I was using the word ultimate, but you're correct, and I momentarily forgot the word.
Were they there even prior to the landfill?
As I understand it, osprey are just dominant throughout the world.
Okay.
That they live in 6 continents. That they are the marine hunter in those 6 continents. That they reign supreme, and we're really proud of their presence at Freshkills because their thriving means that the waters are clean to support all those levels of life beneath them.
Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. And then radioactive waste. What was the radioactive waste?
Same question. Unless people threw away.
There wasn't radioactive.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Which it's not that wild. I don't mean to dismiss and say unless somebody threw away radioactive waste, and of course no one did. Occasionally, people who have at-home medical devices, or are they themselves their bodies has radioactive material in it, and their waste truly. Something a tour I had of the waste transfer facility recently, they were describing a senior citizen who used diapers, and they, because of the radiation treatments that they were receiving from chemotherapy. They threw these diapers away, and just the curbside setup. But the trucks that come into waste transfer facilities do today and have for many decades gone through radiation detection arches, but there are so many protective layers in place. So once the truck goes through, and if the alarm goes off, the drivers get out, the whole load is deconstructed, taken part by hand. Every little piece is inspected until somebody goes, oh, it was, and then they find the source. And only then do they figure out what to do with the rest of the refuse, how much time it's spent with the things that was radioactive, and then they deal with everything as appropriate. The radioactive material is dealt with as radioactive waste. It's not like, okay, now put it into put it in the rail car is what would happen to it today, or in the past, okay, now put it in the landfill. That's not what happens with any radioactive waste. So no radioactive material was ever put into Freshkills. No.
Oh, that's good to hear. No three-eyed fish.
No three-eyed fish.
So, does it still act like a wetlands? Because it used to be a wetlands.
At its margins, yes. So there are still some parts of it were never landfilled upon. So some parts of the South Mound in particular, I've been shown, are like extant wetlands.
Yeah.
And some parts of the North Mound look out onto the William T. Davis Wildlife Refuge, which is still a wetland. And of course, all at the edges of the mounds are wetland edges. So yes, there are still some wetlands, but we're talking about a space that was 2,200 acres of wetlands, and we're now talking about a space that is, usually they report the waterfront in linear miles. When we report on when we're applying for grants or something, for instance. We don't talk about square miles of wetlands, we talk about linear miles or linear kilometers of wetlands, because that is almost a more accurate way to consider them. They're only, I guess, I don't know, I would be guessing here, but several dozen feet between you and when the landfilling began.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the High Line is run by a private organization, Friends of the High Line.
Correct. It
or
is
in tandem with New York City Park.
In tandem. So
But
it is
how
a public
about-
park that has as a partner as the one that runs the programming, that does the fundraising, the nonprofit. We are run similarly.
Okay.
It is to be a public park. It is not yet a public park. Important to notice. I did keep mentioning and thanking our partner, Department of Sanitation. They own and operate the site.
Still to this day. Okay.
Still to this day. Yeah, there are procedures to grant it over or pass it over. I don't know what the proper verb would be. Pass it over to the Parks Department. And we're in the process of that now for portions of the North Park. So North Park Phase 1 is owned by the Parks Department now, and it was passed over or granted over, or whatever the verb would be, from the Department of Sanitation before. But our programming, when I say our, Freshkills Park Alliance's programming, is delivered by the Freshkills Park Alliance. Yeah, but we have, working on the same team, Freshkills Park staff, New York City Park staff, and the Alliance staff, the nonprofit side staff, and they work in tandem together. In fact, the administrator of the park and the president of the Alliance are the same person, and that is a similar structure that happens in Central Park and Prospect Park, I believe in the High Line as well. It's something that's proven itself effective throughout the park system, so that's why it's being replicated here at Freshkills.
And what's the architectural firm working on it, or is there one firm?
The firm that delivered the initial master plan is the James Corner Field Operations, is what they were known as at the time.
Oh, okay.
I believe they're transitioning now, or have just transitioned to just make it field operations,
Right.
Because there are so many personalities and people at work there, as visionary as James Corner was and is. He's not the only person that worked on it, so I think that this is, although don't quote me, please refer to the field operations site to see why they were changing the name. But they put out the initial master plan, as I said, and we have very talented parks employees, landscape architects that are helping to deliver the the fine-tuned small additions or changes that are happening here on there. So, for instance, one of my coworkers in New York City Parks Department, he helped to work on North Park, or there's a greenway that runs along the edge of the site, along Richmond Avenue, and I know that he did tremendous work to getting that accomplished. Yeah.
That was Andrew Guftinson and Andy, amazing representative of Freshkills Park, gives tours of Freshkills Park. Highly recommend going on one of these tours right here, Classic Harbor Line. I've already done, as I mentioned, I've covered like on live stream like 14, 15. I think this should be the 15th one, and I've been on a few others. So every time I come, it's a blast. And I've seen so many different things from these cruises. And the cruise blast, everyone's amazing. So highly recommend going on classichairborline.com. Check out the replay of this video. You can rewatch. Check out the other live videos from Classic Harbor Line. They're all on the Classic Harbor Line YouTube. And we go learn about oysters. We go see how boats are built. We go on a huge sail ship. We do a whole host of different things. I'm Ariel. I run Urbanist Exploring Cities, so you can find me there on YouTube or Urbanist Live on Instagram. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in. Huge round of hearts to Classic Harbor Line for always having the most kick-ass cruises through beautiful New York City. Keep being awesome and always keep on exploring and stay curious, my friends. Have a great day. Bye-bye.